Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments if you would ever take a shortcut through an unknown forest road at night, because tonight's story is about 5 friends who thought they had found a faster way home, until their car died in the middle of nowhere, their phones lost signal, and they realized the trees around them were hiding something that had been waiting for travelers like them for a very long time. It started just after sunset, when Ethan, Kyle, Marissa, Brooke, and Noah left the highway after seeing a detour sign that looked old, bent, and half covered in mud. Traffic on the main road had been backed up for miles because of an accident ahead, and Noah, who had always been the one to find shortcuts on every trip, swore there was an older mountain road that would reconnect with the highway farther east. It looked rough on the map, but still drivable. He said it would save them at least an hour. At first, nobody argued. They had already spent too much time in the car. The sky was darkening, and the thought of getting off the dead highway sounded better than sitting still with the headlights stretching endlessly in front of them. So Ethan turned off the pavement and onto the narrow road, disappearing into the trees. That was the moment everything changed. The forest swallowed the last signs of civilization almost immediately. The road became thinner, rougher, and darker with every mile. Branches scraped the sides of the SUV hard enough to make Brooke flinch. Mud splashed up against the doors. The trees pressed closer until their headlights lit nothing but trunks, low fog, and the twisting dirt path ahead. There were no houses, no signs, no other cars, just black woods on both sides and a road that seemed to pull them deeper into a place people had forgotten. Marissa was the first to say they should turn back, not because she was scared, not yet, but because the road looked wrong, almost abandoned. Noah kept staring at his phone map, frowning at the signal disappearing and reappearing, telling them they were fine. Ethan stayed quiet, both hands tight on the wheel, eyes fixed on the beams of light bouncing over roots and ruts in the road. Kyle tried to keep the mood alive with jokes about horror movies and bad decisions, but even he sounded less confident with every mile. Then they saw the first sign that someone lived out there, a deer carcass hanging from a bent tree branch just off the road. It swung slightly in the headlights as they passed. The skin had been stripped badly, unevenly, and one leg was missing below the knee. Brooke let out a sharp breath and turned in her seat to look back at it through the rear window until the trees swallowed it whole. Noah said it was probably just hunters. Ethan didn't answer. A few minutes later, the road dipped into a low, muddy stretch between hills, and that was when the SUV hit something hard. The impact cracked through the underside of the vehicle like a gunshot. The whole car jerked violently to one side. Ethan cursed and slammed the brakes. For a second, nobody spoke. The engine still ran, but there was a new sound now, a bad one, low and rough from somewhere beneath them. They climbed out into the cold evening air with their phone lights and one weak flashlight from the glove compartment. The road under their feet was soft mud mixed with broken stones. Ethan knelt beside the front tire and found the damage almost immediately. A line of jagged metal spikes had been half buried under mud across the narrowest part of the road. 2 tires were ruined. One of the spikes had punched into something deeper under the vehicle too, and dark fluid was already dripping steadily into the mud. No one spoke for a few seconds. The realization hit all of them at once. That wasn't random debris. That wasn't an accident. Someone had placed those spikes there on purpose. Brooke whispered the thing nobody wanted to say out loud. "We need to leave. Right now." Ethan stood and looked at the road behind them. It had already gone almost completely black. The forest around them had no sound except wind moving high above and the slow ticking of the damaged engine cooling in the dark. No insects, no distant traffic, no dogs, no lights anywhere. Noah kept saying maybe it was an old hunting trap, maybe some local trying to keep trucks off the road, maybe they were overreacting, but his voice was unsteady now. He didn't believe himself anymore. Then Kyle pointed his flashlight toward the side of the road and found footprints in the mud. Big ones, barely visible, but there. Deep impressions leading from the trees to the spikes and then back into the trees again. Bare footprints, human-shaped but wide, wrong somehow, as if the feet that made them had spread under too much weight. Marissa backed closer to Brooke. Ethan said they were getting back in the car. It still started. Maybe they could move it a little farther. Maybe they could coast downhill until they found a house or signal. He turned the key. The engine coughed, rattled, screamed once, and died. This time it did not come back. The silence after that was so complete that every breath felt loud. Then, from somewhere in the trees to their left, came a sound that made all 5 of them freeze. Not an animal call, not the wind. Laughter. Low, short, broken, and far enough away to make it worse, as if whoever made it did not care whether they heard it or not. Brooke grabbed Ethan's arm so hard he winced. Noah swept his phone light through the trees and found nothing but trunks and darkness. Kyle whispered that they needed to get off the road, that standing beside the dead SUV was the worst place they could be. Ethan agreed. They took what they could quickly. The flashlight, 2 phones with fading batteries, a tire iron, a half-empty water bottle, and Marissa's backpack with a hoodie and some snacks inside. Noah wanted to follow the road on foot, but Brooke pointed to something on the far side of the ditch, a faint light, small, yellow, deep through the trees, maybe a quarter mile away. It flickered once and disappeared, then returned. A house, a cabin. Maybe the people living there had a phone. Maybe they had a truck. Maybe they had been the ones who set the spikes. None of the options were good, but standing in the road was worse. So they left the SUV and crossed into the woods. The forest floor was wet and uneven, thick with dead leaves and slick roots. The deeper they went, the colder it felt. Their lights shook over tree trunks scarred with old knife marks and strange hanging bundles made of bone, feathers, and rusted wire. Kyle swore and knocked one aside with the tire iron, but when it hit the ground, they all saw what it really was. Not bone from animals, too small, too human-looking in places. Ethan told everyone to keep moving. The yellow light ahead grew clearer through the trees until the shape of a cabin finally emerged from the darkness. It stood in a small clearing cut out of the forest, made of rotting timber and patched metal, with one dim lamp burning near the porch. An old pickup truck sat beside it with no wheels, half sunk into the mud. Behind the cabin was a long shed with its doors hanging open. To one side, poles stood in the ground with strips of stained cloth fluttering from them. The place did not look abandoned. It looked used, recently. Marissa said they should go back. Noah snapped that back to what? The dead car? The spikes in the road? The laughter in the trees? Ethan stepped onto the porch first and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. The cabin remained silent. Then the door shifted inward by itself, just enough to open a crack. Brooke started crying quietly then, more from nerves than panic, but nobody told her to stop because they all felt it too. Ethan pushed the door open with the tire iron raised in his other hand. The smell hit them first. Rot, smoke, wet wood, and something sour underneath it all. Their lights moved over the inside slowly. A table made from rough boards, dirty jars lining a shelf, hooks hanging from the ceiling, a small wood stove still warm enough to glow faintly. That meant someone had been there very recently. On the far wall hung photographs. At first, they looked like hunting pictures, but when Noah stepped closer, his face lost all color. They were not animals. They were travelers. Polaroids, old and new, pinned in rows. Men, women, families, some standing beside broken vehicles, some tied to chairs, some already bloodied, all taken somewhere in those woods. Brooke saw one photo of a smiling couple next to a blue sedan and started shaking so hard she had to sit down. She recognized the woman. It was from a missing person story that had gone viral months earlier. Marissa whispered that they had to leave now, but before anyone could move, Kyle called from the open doorway of the back room. He had found something worse. The rest of them followed his light and stopped dead. The back room was lined with shelves full of canned food, tools, traps, axes, and hunting knives. On one wall hung license plates from different states. On another were backpacks, jackets, purses, and children's shoes. At the center of the room sat a wooden chair bolted to the floor with leather straps on the arms. Beneath it, the boards were black with old stains. Noah turned and vomited into the sink. Brooke began sobbing for real. Ethan said they were leaving, right now, no more discussion. Then from somewhere outside the cabin came the slow creak of porch boards under a heavy step. One step, then another. Someone had come home. Nobody breathed. That was the first thing fear took from them. The cabin, already too small a moment ago, now felt like a trap built around their bodies. Ethan held the tire iron so tightly his knuckles went pale. Brooke's sobbing stopped instantly, cut off by terror. Noah wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and stared toward the front room, as if his brain refused to accept what his ears already knew. Someone was outside, not passing by, not approaching from a distance, already on the porch. The wood creaked again, slow and heavy, with the kind of weight that belonged to someone large or carrying something even heavier. Kyle moved first, but only by instinct, stepping away from the doorway of the back room and backing into the shelves hard enough to rattle jars and metal tools. The tiny sound seemed impossibly loud. Marissa grabbed Brooke's wrist and pulled her lower behind the chair bolted to the floor. Ethan raised one hand for silence, though nobody needed the warning. Another step crossed the porch, then a drag, like something long scraping over old boards. The front door, still half open from when they entered, shifted another inch inward with a soft groan. The lamp outside cast a strip of yellow light across the cabin floor. It stopped just short of the back room doorway where they were all frozen. No one could see the porch clearly from there, only that blade of light and the black shape beyond it. Then the front room floor creaked. Whoever had been outside was now inside the cabin. Brooke pressed both hands over her mouth. Noah looked wildly around the room and spotted a back window above a rusted sink. He pointed at it, and for a second, hope flashed through all of them at once. Another way out. Ethan nodded fast, quietly. No sudden movements. Marissa and Brooke moved first, crouching low. Kyle followed, still clutching the flashlight. Noah reached the sink and tried the window latch. It wouldn't move. He pushed harder, painted shut, swollen with age, maybe nailed from the outside. He muttered a curse and reached for one of the tools hanging near the wall. In the front room, something was moving slowly, not searching in panic, not rushing, just walking. A boot scraped lightly across the floor, then another, then silence again. It felt deliberate, almost patient, like the person knew exactly how fear worked and was feeding it on purpose. Ethan moved out of the back room doorway, just enough to glance toward the front. He saw a shape crossing the narrow strip of yellow light near the stove. Tall, broad, wearing something stitched from layers of old cloth and animal hide, dark with mud and old stains. He could not see the face clearly, only the outline of a head too misshapen to feel normal. Ethan ducked back instantly. His chest was hammering so hard it hurt. One of them. That was the only thought he could hold on to. There was more than one. The spikes in the road, the footprints, the photographs, the chair, the cabin still warm, the porch steps now. They had walked straight into a place built for this. Noah finally found a rusted hammer and swung it at the window latch. The first hit gave a dull metal crack. The second shattered the glass. The sound exploded through the cabin. For one split second, everything froze. Then the figure in the front room moved, fast, far too fast for something that large. Ethan shouted for everyone to go as the thing crashed into the hallway. broad shoulders slamming the doorframe hard enough to splinter wood. In the chaos of flying glass and screaming, they saw it properly for the first time. A huge man, bent slightly at the shoulders, wearing layers of filthy coats and leather, one side of his face hidden behind tangled hair, and a mask made from animal skin stretched tight over the skull, the other side showing grey-pale flesh pulled strangely over bone. One eye was clouded white, the other burned with animal focus. He held a hooked blade in one hand, long and rust-dark, and in the other something hanging from a rope like a butcher's tool. Brooke screamed so hard the sound tore through the room. Noah and Kyle smashed the rest of the window with the hammer and flashlight. Ethan grabbed Marissa and shoved her toward the opening. She crawled through first, tearing her jacket on the broken frame. Brooke went next, half lifted by Kyle as she sobbed uncontrollably. Outside, the night air hit them cold and sharp. Ethan turned back just in time to see the big man lunge. The hooked blade flashed downward. Kyle threw himself sideways, but not fast enough. The blade caught his shoulder and spun him against the shelves, smashing jars and glass around him. He screamed, collapsed, then tried to rise again with blood soaking one side of his shirt. Noah swung the hammer at the man's head. The blow landed with a sick, dull thud, enough to twist the mask sideways, but the giant barely reacted. He grabbed Noah by the throat with one hand and hurled him across the room. Noah hit the stove so hard it toppled, spilling embers and burning wood across the floorboards. Smoke rose instantly. Ethan shouted at Kyle, grabbed him under one arm, and dragged him toward the broken window. The big man turned toward them again, but now firelight and smoke were spreading through the cabin, making everything strobe red and gold. Kyle was dead weight, half conscious, his boots catching on broken wood. Marissa leaned back through the window from outside and grabbed his other arm. Together, she and Ethan hauled him over the sill just as something slammed into the wall behind them from inside. They hit the mud hard outside the cabin. For 1 second, all 5 of them were out. Then the shed doors behind the cabin banged open. Another figure stepped into the clearing, smaller than the first, but still wrong. Thin, long-limbed, carrying a bow made from rough wood and a bundle of arrows with black feathers. Its head twitched slightly as it looked toward them, and when it smiled, the teeth caught the porch light in a way that made Brooke choke on her own breath. "Run!" Ethan screamed, and this time they all did. They fled into the woods behind the cabin with no plan except distance. Branches whipped their faces. Mud sucked at their shoes. Kyle stumbled almost immediately, leaving a dark spray of blood on leaves and roots behind him. Noah grabbed one of his arms, and Ethan took the other, dragging him between them, while Marissa pulled Brooke forward by the wrist. Behind them came shouting, not words exactly, more like broken calls and answering cries moving through the trees in different directions. There were at least 2 of them, maybe more. The forest that had seemed empty before was alive now, not with animals or wind, but with people who knew those woods better than roads or maps. They did not crash blindly through the dark the way the 5 friends did. They moved around them, ahead of them, beside them. A shape passed between trees to Ethan's right, just outside the reach of the flashlight beam, then vanished. Something wooden clacked together somewhere uphill. A trap? A signal? Brooke slipped and fell face first in the mud. Marissa dragged her up before Ethan could even turn. Kyle was fading fast, every step weaker than the last. Noah kept saying they needed to stop the bleeding, needed to hide, needed to do anything other than run blind, but there was nowhere to stop, not with those sounds spreading through the forest around them. Then Marissa saw a rise through the trees and shouted that there was something ahead. They stumbled toward it and found an old fire tower standing on a ridge above the forest, steel legs eaten with rust, wooden platform at the top, ladder still intact. It looked ancient, forgotten, probably unsafe, but it was higher ground, the only thing in those woods that gave them even the illusion of a chance. Ethan and Noah forced Kyle toward the ladder first. He could barely hold on, so they had to half push, half lift him upward. Marissa climbed after them. Brooke was already on the second section, sobbing and slipping on the wet rungs. Ethan was last, turning once to sweep the flashlight over the dark trees below. For a second he saw nothing. Then the beam caught eyes, not animal eyes, human, one pair low behind brush, another farther left between two trunks, then a third, reflecting pale from deeper in the forest, watching, waiting. He killed the light and climbed. By the time he reached the top platform, the tower was swaying slightly beneath the combined weight of all 5 of them, and the wind moving across the ridge. The platform had a tiny lookout shack, half rotten, with one wall missing and old radio equipment reduced to rust, but it was high enough to see over the trees. For the first time since they left the road, Ethan spotted something beyond the forest, faint lights in the far distance, maybe the highway, maybe a town, maybe only another lie of the night. Still, it was something. Noah laid Kyle down and tried to press Brooke's hoodie against the wound in his shoulder. Blood kept seeping through. Kyle was shivering now, skin pale and slick, eyes not focusing right. Marissa crouched by the edge of the platform, staring into the dark below, unable to stop shaking. Brooke kept whispering that they were going to die, over and over, like if she said it enough times it would become quieter. Ethan wanted to tell them they would make it, that dawn would come, that someone would pass on the road, that police would find the SUV, but lying felt useless when the woods below were already moving. A metallic clang rang out beneath them. One of the tower legs had been hit, then another, then silence. Noah leaned over the edge and immediately recoiled. "They're down there," he whispered. "They're climbing." The words barely left Noah's mouth before the whole tower shuddered again, harder this time, metal groaning beneath them as something struck one of the lower legs with brutal force. Brooke screamed and crawled backward across the platform until her shoulders hit the rotting wall of the lookout shack. Marissa dropped to her knees and gripped the floorboard so tightly her fingers whitened. Ethan rushed to the edge and looked down through the gaps in the planks. At first he saw only darkness and moving branches. Then a shape stepped into the weak light, spilling from their flashlight. The big one, the same huge man from the cabin, standing at the base of the tower with his head tilted up, the hooked blade hanging loose at his side. Beside him, half hidden by brush, the thinner figure moved restlessly with the bow, pacing in short circles like an animal waiting for permission. A third shape appeared farther back between the trees, carrying something long over one shoulder. Ethan pulled away from the edge so fast he nearly slipped. There were 3, maybe more, and they weren't rushing because they didn't need to. They had all night. Another blow slammed into the tower leg. The entire platform jolted. Kyle groaned in pain where he lay pressed against the shack wall, one hand weakly clutching the bloody hoodie over his shoulder. Noah shouted that they had to do something now before the whole structure came down. Ethan looked around wildly. The lookout shack was nearly empty, except for rusted radio parts, a broken chair, a coiled length of old cable, and a red metal emergency flare box mounted crooked near the doorway. He ripped it open with both hands. Inside were 2 road flares, old but dry, and a rusted signal pistol with one flare cartridge still sealed in wax paper. Hope flashed through him so sharply it almost hurt. "We can signal," he said, too loud, too desperate. "If anyone's out there, they'll see it." Noah grabbed the pistol immediately and checked it with shaking fingers. Another impact hit the tower below. A loud metallic crack followed it. One of the lower braces had bent. Marissa started crying harder, not even trying to hide it anymore. Brooke was staring over the edge into the trees, whispering that they were moving, they were circling, they were waiting for them to come down. Ethan struck one of the road flares against the box. For one terrible second it did nothing. Then it erupted into furious red light and sparks, bathing the whole platform in bloody color. The forest below changed instantly. The dark shapes around the tower became visible in ugly flashes: mud, wet leaves, pale skin, the animal hide mask, the bow, another figure with a metal chain in one hand. They all recoiled from the flare light, not in panic, but enough to confirm something vital. They did not like fire. Ethan leaned over the edge and thrust the flare downward, shouting with everything left in his lungs. The red light hissed and spat, illuminating the big man's face beneath the hanging hair and twisted skin. He lifted one arm to shield his eye and stepped back from the tower leg. The thinner one vanished into the brush immediately. For a brief moment, the pressure around the tower broke. "Now!" Noah shouted, and fired the signal pistol into the sky. The flare screamed upward, trailing sparks high above the forest, before bursting into a bright red star over the treetops. All 5 of them stared as it hung there, burning over the black woods like a wound in the sky. It was beautiful. It was tiny. It might have meant nothing, but it was all they had. Then an arrow slammed into the shack wall inches from Brooke's head. She shrieked and threw herself flat. The bowman had changed position. Another arrow hit the platform floor and quivered between Ethan and Noah. The big man struck the tower again. Metal screamed. The platform dipped sickeningly to one side. They were out of time. Ethan looked over the far side of the ridge and saw something he hadn't noticed before. A steep service trail leading down from the tower toward a dark cut in the trees. Maybe an old forestry road, maybe nothing. But if the flare had been seen, they needed to move towards somewhere rescuers could reach, not die on top of a collapsing tower. He shouted for everyone who could stand to get up. Kyle tried. He couldn't. Noah swore and hooked Kyle's good arm over his own shoulder. Marissa grabbed Brooke. Ethan lit the second flare and moved first, holding the red fire out over the ladder as they started climbing down the far side of the tower, away from the biggest shape below. Every rung felt slick. Every second felt stolen. The flare spit red smoke into his face, filling the night with sulfur and heat. Beneath them, the tower groaned again as the killers realized what they were doing. A howl rose from the trees to their left, answered from somewhere farther downslope. Ethan reached the ground and ran for the service trail, sweeping the flare in wide arcs to keep the nearest shadows back. Marissa and Brooke stumbled after him. Noah came next, half carrying Kyle. Behind them, something hit the ladder hard enough to rattle the whole tower. They ran downhill through brush and mud, slipping over roots, tearing through briars, the flare throwing wild red light over trunks and rocks like a scene from hell. The service trail was barely a trail at all, just 2 sunken lines of earth winding through the forest, but it was open enough to move fast. For a while, maybe less than a minute, maybe more, Ethan let himself believe they might actually make it. Then a wire caught Brooke at ankle height. She went down hard, flipping forward with a scream as the trap snapped tight around her leg and yanked her sideways into the brush. Marissa lunged for her instantly. Ethan spun with the flare and saw the snare line running up to a bent sapling that had snapped half closed. Brooke was hanging twisted against the undergrowth, sobbing and clawing at the wire cutting into her skin. Before Ethan could reach her, the thin one with the bow burst from the trees like he had been waiting for exactly that moment. He carried no arrow now, only a long knife made from something crude and blackened. Ethan met him with the flare. He jammed the burning end straight into the man's shoulder. The smell of scorched cloth and flesh hit at once. The thin figure screamed, a high, broken, almost childlike shriek, and fell back, thrashing. Marissa hacked at the snare wire with the tire iron they still had from the SUV. Noah dragged Kyle farther down the trail, shouting that more were coming. Ethan could hear them now, branches cracking uphill, the big one moving fast despite his size, another voice barking from deeper in the woods. The snare finally gave. Brooke collapsed into Marissa's arms, unable to put weight on the leg. There was no time. Ethan took Brooke under one arm, Marissa the other, and they stumbled downhill again, half running, half falling. The flare was dying in Ethan's hand, shrinking to a savage red core. Ahead, through the trees, a pale strip opened in the darkness. Road. real road, wider than the forest track. Ethan shouted so hard his voice broke. They burst out of the trees onto cracked pavement just as headlights rounded a bend. For one blinding second, none of them could see. Noah threw up both arms, screaming for help. The oncoming pickup skidded sideways, brakes shrieking, stopping only yards from them. Two men jumped out, forest utility workers by the look of their jackets, staring in disbelief at the blood, mud, and sheer panic crashing out of the woods toward them. Ethan turned back toward the tree line just in time to see the big man stop at the edge of the forest. He did not step onto the road. The flare in Ethan's hand finally died. In the wash of the truck headlights, the giant shape stood motionless between the trees, one side of his face hidden, the clouded eye reflecting pale for a heartbeat, before he retreated into the dark. The others were already gone, vanished as if the forest had swallowed them whole. After that, everything came in broken flashes. Utility workers calling emergency services, Noah collapsing beside Kyle in the road, Marissa wrapped in a blanket, unable to stop shaking, Brooke screaming when paramedics cut the wire from her leg, Ethan sitting in the back of an ambulance covered in dried blood that wasn't all his. Police searched the forest at dawn. They found the SUV on the spike trap road. They found the cabin. They found the photographs, the chair, the back room full of belongings from strangers who had never made it home. But the people who lived there were gone. The woods behind the cabin were empty, except for old snares, butchered animal remains, and trails that seemed to split and vanish among the trees. Kyle survived surgery, though his shoulder was never the same again. Brooke walked with a limp for months. Noah stopped taking shortcuts forever. Marissa refused to speak about what she saw in the cabin, or on the tower, or in the trees around it. As for Ethan, he told the police there had been at least 3 of them, maybe more, living deep in the forest and hunting travelers who strayed too far off the highway. The official story called them violent squatters, survivalists, feral criminals hiding in remote land. The truth felt worse, because squatters don't leave roads rigged with buried spikes like fishing hooks for cars. Squatters don't line their walls with smiling photos of the people they've taken, and squatters don't stop at the edge of a road lit by headlights, as if some line exists they cannot cross. The cabin was burned down weeks later by authorities. The tower was dismantled. The side road was permanently closed. Yet people still disappear in those mountains every year. A trucker once claimed he saw a figure standing near the old detour sign long after midnight, waving one arm for help beside what looked like a broken-down vehicle. Another woman reported hearing laughter in the trees after her tire blew on a logging road miles from there. So if you ever see an old shortcut cutting through a forest no map seems to understand, keep driving, even if the highway is blocked, even if it costs you hours, because some roads are not shortcuts at all. They are traps, and once the trees close behind you, whatever is living out there may already be listening for your engine. This story should have ended the moment the pickup's headlights hit them on that cracked road, but some places do not let people go so easily. The utility workers pulled Ethan, Marissa, Brooke, Noah, and the barely conscious Kyle into the truck and locked the doors, while one of them called emergency services with shaking hands. The second worker kept staring at the tree line, convinced he had seen movement just beyond the edge of the headlights. For a few seconds, everyone in the cab did the same. The forest stood black and still, wet from the night, empty in a way that only made it worse. Then the radio cracked with a dispatcher's voice and the spell broke. They drove, fast. Nobody looked back again. By dawn, police, forest deputies, and emergency teams had flooded the area. The side road was blocked. The SUV was photographed where it had died beside the buried spikes. Search crews followed the service trails and animal paths back to the cabin. What they found there made the case impossible to dismiss as panic or hallucination. The cabin was real. The back room was real. The walls of photographs were real. So were the traps, the ropes, the butchered remains hanging behind the shed. and the personal belongings of travelers who had been reported missing over the years. The fire tower on the ridge still carried fresh blood on the platform boards. The snare wire Brooke had been caught in was still twisted low across the trail, and yet the people living in those woods were gone. Not one body, not one person caught, just the signs of them everywhere, as if the forest had opened and hidden them the second real help arrived. Police questioned the survivors for hours. Ethan told them about the spikes in the road, the cabin, the photographs, the chair bolted to the floor, the giant man with the hook, the thinner one with the bow, the eyes in the woods below the tower. Noah confirmed all of it, though his voice shook so badly he had to keep stopping. Marissa could barely speak. Brooke gave her statement through tears, still trembling every time someone opened a door too suddenly. Kyle drifted in and out of consciousness in the hospital, muttering about the tower swaying and footsteps circling below. Officially, the authorities called them violent squatters, isolated killers, heavily armed drifters, using remote forest land as a trap for stranded drivers. It was the kind of explanation that fits on paper, clean enough for reports, reasonable enough for the news. But reports never capture the feeling of being hunted through black trees by people who knew exactly where every trail, tower, wire, and service road would take you. They never explain why the road had been rigged so carefully that any vehicle passing through that mud stretch would have died in the same place. They never explain how those people vanished so completely before dawn, taking even their freshest tracks with them. Weeks later, the cabin was burned, the fire tower dismantled, and the detour road closed for good, with steel barriers and warning signs. Authorities said the area was unsafe due to illegal structures and unstable terrain. Locals said something else. They said that road had been bad long before the police ever found the cabin. They said livestock had disappeared in those hills for years. They said hikers sometimes heard metal striking metal deep in the forest at night, like someone building traps in the dark. One old man who lived 30 miles from the mountains told reporters he had once seen a vehicle parked on that same road after midnight, with the driver's side door hanging open and no one around it except a figure standing at the tree line watching. Most people laughed those stories off. Ethan didn't. None of the 5 survivors did. Kyle left the state as soon as he recovered enough to travel. Noah stopped driving back roads altogether, even in daylight. Brooke never fully lost the limp in her leg, and to this day she refuses to camp, hike, or sleep anywhere without locked doors and working phone signal. Marissa deleted every photo from that trip, sold the clothes she had worn that night, and still wakes up at the sound of porch boards creaking in old houses. Ethan tried the hardest to move on. For months he told himself they had escaped, that the cabin was gone, that whatever lived in those mountains had lost its ground once the police found it. Then, almost a year later, he received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. No note, no words. Just a photograph of the 5 of them standing beside the dead SUV the night their tires blew, taken from somewhere inside the trees before they ever reached the cabin. On the back, scratched into the white border, were 4 simple words. You took the road. Ethan went to the police with it immediately. They ran prints, checked cameras, traced the postage. Nothing useful, no witnesses, no leads. That was when he finally accepted the worst part of the story. They had not escaped because the danger ended. They had escaped because they got lucky. The road, the cabin, the traps, the tower, the forest itself, none of it had been destroyed in the way that mattered. The people in those woods were still out there somewhere, waiting for the next blocked highway, the next impatient driver, the next group of friends who thought a shortcut through the mountains would save them time. So if you ever see a bent detour sign pointing toward a road your map barely recognizes, and the forest ahead looks too dark even for night, keep going. Sit in traffic. Waste the gas. Turn around. Do anything except follow that road into the trees. because the people who hunt there know exactly what kind of traveler takes a shortcut, and if you make the wrong turn, they may already be watching from the forest, smiling and waiting for your engine to stop.